The wind howled, a hungry wolf tearing at the vast plain, flinging stinging clouds of dust. The sun, crimson like fresh blood, slowly sank below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of rust and ash, foretelling the imminent night. Here, in the heart of Arizona, where civilization seemed but a fleeting dream, a lost cabin stood alone, like a forgotten guardian of the endless expanse. Its roof sagged under the weight of time. Its windows were empty sockets, but smoke, a thin wisp rising from the chimney, bore witness to life within. Inside, near the hearth, sat an old man named Elias. Deep wrinkles furrowed his face, and his eyes, gleaming like those of an old eagle, watched the dancing flames intently. His hands, rough and sinewy, habitually handled a hunting knife, honing the blade to perfection. He was almost 70, but the years spent in solitude, in an unceasing struggle with harsh nature, had tempered his body and spirit. He knew these lands as well as his 5 fingers, sensed the approaching storm by the scent of the air, and a stranger's presence through the slightest shifts in the surrounding silence. Elias was waiting. He had waited for many long years, knowing that one day, he awaited those who were destined to arrive. He awaited those who would bring him his most cherished desire, a chance to atone for his sins. A saint he was not, that was certain. In the past, he had committed a monstrous error, a mistake that robbed him of everything dear to his heart. And now, in this desolate place, his life was governed by only one hope: to restore justice, even at the cost of his own life. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the distant sound of hooves. Elias froze, his heart seeming to stop. He heard not one, but several strikes. This meant that not one, but a whole group of riders had arrived. He hastily extinguished the fire and hid his knife beneath his shirt. He knew their purpose. He had been expecting them. 3 figures, cloaked in shadows, halted before the cabin. The wide brims of their hats concealed their faces, but Elias could see the icy glint in their eyes, betraying them as hired killers. He understood their trade, this merciless work. He knew they were after him. The contract had been fulfilled, and now he was their target. One of them, tall and wiry, knocked on the door. The sound, echoing and insistent, reverberated through the cramped space of the cabin, chilling his blood. Elias slowly approached the door, his hand brushing against the cold iron of the bolt. Each touch sent a wave of icy fear through him. "Who's there?" his voice, thick and cracking, asked. He inquired in a husky tone. "We come bearing a message, old man." A voice echoed from behind the door, and it too was raspy, as if its owner were barely suppressing a cough. Elias twisted his lips into a bitter smirk, his wrinkled face seeming to reflect all the years he had lived. A message. They probably had no idea that he too had arrived with a message. A message he had given himself many years ago, back when the sun seemed brighter and hope was inexhaustible. Slowly, creaking with old bones, he opened the door. The first to step into the hut was a tall, gaunt man whose face appeared to be carved with scars, like a map of unknown battles. His eyes, cold and gray, scrutinized Elias. In his hand, the man gripped a revolver, its deadly barrel pointed directly at the old man. Behind him, like shadows, followed 2 more, holding shotguns, prepared to unleash a lethal storm of lead at any moment. They swiftly surveyed the cabin, assessing the surroundings. A tall man whose height seemed to reach the ceiling stepped forward. "Are you Elias?" his voice snapped, like the crack of a whip. "Yes," Elias replied calmly, betraying not a single emotion. His voice was steady, without a tremor. No sparks of fear danced in the depths of his eyes, only tranquility. The man continued, his words seeming to hang in the stale air of the hut. "We've come for you. You've been ordered." Elias nodded, his face remaining unreadable. The assassins exchanged glances, a shadow of surprise passing over their faces. Such a reaction, such calm acceptance of fate, clearly threw them off balance. Usually, victims either begged for mercy or tried to escape. But this old man, his behavior seemed strange, even frightening. "So, you won't resist?" The young bandit's voice, his face hidden beneath a thick black beard, sounded harsh and wary. Elias smirked, and in that instant, a strange spark flickered in his eyes. "Resist?" he echoed, his voice a whisper laced with a strange mockery. "I have not a single reason to do so." He took a step back, as if inviting the unwelcome guests into his home. A heavy silence descended. The bandits exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting a mix of disbelief and suspicion. One of them, the largest, swallowed with visible effort before stepping forward. The others followed cautiously, looking around, prepared for any surprise. The shack seemed cramped and almost completely empty. A few creaking old chairs, a rough table, and a bed stuffed with hard straw. That was all the old man possessed. "Well," the tall man drawled, his voice echoing like thunder in the stillness. "Then it's quite straightforward." He slowly raised his revolver, the cold metal glinting in the dim light that filtered through the cracks in the walls. Elias remained remarkably calm, his gaze unwavering, as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time. Suddenly, another insistent knock echoed from outside, causing the three assassins to tense immediately. "Who's there?" the tall man growled, his voice now sounding muffled and menacing. "It's not us, that's for sure," the bearded assassin replied hastily, his eyes darting around the room. "Someone else must be here." Elias said nothing, absorbing the heavy premonition. He knew who was coming. He felt its approach with every fiber of his being. The tall man, tense and prepared for anything, moved toward the door. His hand instinctively rested on the grip of his revolver. He clenched his teeth almost silently and cautiously opened the door. In the doorway stood she, a young, strikingly beautiful woman whose eyes were wide with terror. She wore a dirty, crumpled dress, and her dark hair was wildly tousled, as though she had been running for a long time. She looked bewildered, fear evident in her eyes, which were wide open and filled with horror. "What do you want?" the tall man demanded harshly, his face seeming chiseled from stone. His voice sounded cold and indifferent. "Help!" the woman gasped, desperately sucking in air. "They're chasing me!" The words practically spat from her mouth as if burning her tongue. The killers exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of surprise and annoyance. They clearly hadn't anticipated this turn of events. "Who are you?" the bearded man demanded, his voice and gaze heavy and grim. "My name is Sarah," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "I was running." She didn't finish. Outside, shattering the silence, gunshots erupted. Bullets whizzed past, narrowly missing her head. The attackers instantly ducked, taking cover behind the doorframe and drawing their weapons. "Ambush!" cried a tall man, his voice sharp and strained. Elias, motionless, watched the scene unfold. Sarah, fearfully glancing around, ran into the hut and slammed the door shut. She pressed her back against the cold wall, trembling all over, like an aspen leaf. "What's happening?" With worry in her voice, she asked, peering into the gloom. "An ambush," Elias replied, his calm voice seemingly unwavering. "They've come for you." "For me?" Sarah echoed, confusion evident in her tone. "But I have no idea who they are." At that very moment, the door was pounded upon again. This time the knocking was persistent, harsh, as if fists were furiously hammering against the wood. "Open up, you sons of bitches," came the shout from the other side. A harsh voice sliced through the silence from outside. "We know you're in there." The tall man, still hesitating to open the door, went pale and turned to Elias, his eyes seemingly absorbing every ounce of fear imaginable. He whispered, barely audible, "What do we do?" Elias smirked, a flicker of madness dancing in his eyes. "You?" he repeated, drawing out the word as if savoring the moment. "You have only to die." He stepped towards the hearth, illuminated by the flickering flames. From beneath his rough canvas shirt, he produced a knife, an old, weathered blade. His hand no longer trembled. His steel muscles seemed to tense, ready for a fight. A fire ignited deep within his eyes, wild and untamed. It was the fire of revenge burning in his heart and the fire of what he considered justice. A cause he was prepared to fight for until the very end. Sarah froze, a statue of horror, watching the old man. She had no idea what was happening. Just a few minutes ago, gasping with fear, she had fled from her pursuers, desperately hoping for salvation. And now she was caught in some mad, incomprehensible game. The tall man, his face contorted with fury, cursed through clenched teeth. He instantly realized he had stumbled into a deadly trap. He knew there was no escape, and now he had to fight, to battle until his last drop of blood to survive. The bearded killer, breathing heavily, tried to smash down the door, but it seemed to be made of a monolithic piece of wood, withstanding his furious blows. The door proved too strong to break down on the first attempt. He then shot the lock. With a crash, the door burst open, letting a chilling draft into the cabin. Two men stood in the doorway, bristling with weapons. Their faces, seemingly frozen in icy masks of ruthlessness, were contorted with malice, as if carved from stone. A deadly firefight erupted. Bullets, like enraged wasps, whizzed all around, shattering the cabin walls, turning them into a sieve. The tall man and the bearded killer, sheltering behind a massive table, desperately returned fire, but the odds were clearly against them. Elias, like a phantom, ignored the deadly hail of bullets, moving silently through the chaos. He attacked his opponents, using a knife as a deadly weapon, his movements honed to perfection, swift and precise as a snake's strike. He knew precisely where to strike for a killing blow. Sarah, pressed against the cold stone wall, watched the gruesome massacre unfold. Before her, as if in a nightmare, men fell one by one, fighting desperately for their lives. She had no idea who these people were or why they were locked in such a brutal conflict, but she knew one thing. She had to survive at any cost. Soon, only Elias, Sarah, and one of the attackers remained on the battlefield. The attacker was gravely wounded, his arm shot through. He retreated, seeking cover behind a broken wooden table that had once adorned this strange place. Elias slowly approached him, his footsteps quiet and deliberate. The man's face was spattered with blood, and sparks of fury danced in his eyes. "Do you know why I'm here?" Elias rasped, his voice tight with tension. He asked, and a deadly threat resonated in his voice, quiet but menacing. The attacker gasped, hissing from the piercing pain. His gaze darted to Elias, and a chilling horror froze in his eyes. You know who I am?" he gasped, his words almost dissolving into the air. "Yes," Elias replied, his voice cold and detached. "You are one of those who stole everything from me." He tightened his grip on the knife's handle. The attacker tried to crawl away, vainly struggling to escape the trap, but there was no escape. Elias struck with lightning speed, the blade finding its mark in his chest. The sharp steel pierced his heart. A heavy silence fell. Only Sarah gasped, her breath coming in ragged, broken gasps as she struggled to believe what she had witnessed. Elias stood frozen over the body of the slain man, his knife still clutched in his hand. He slowly turned to Sarah. His face betrayed no emotion, yet a deep, unbearable pain flickered in the depths of his eyes. "You are free," he said in a hollow voice. Sarah remained silent, as if robbed of her voice. She didn't know what to say, unable to fathom what to do next. A wild fear gripped her, but through it, a wave of gratitude washed over her for the old man who had just saved her life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Elias nodded, his face remaining impassive. He slowly approached the door, which groaned beneath his hand as he opened it. He stood in the doorway, illuminated by the dim light of the corridor, appearing as a shadow. "Leave," he commanded abruptly, his voice as deep and hollow as if it came from the depths of his soul. "And never return." Sarah remained rooted to the spot, as if she had become part of the floor. She kept her eyes fixed on the old man, compassion and deep sorrow etched in her gaze. "And you?" she whispered softly, her lips barely moving. "What will you do?" Elias gave a wry smile, deep lines crinkling at the corners of his eyes. "I will stay here," he said firmly, his voice sounding hollow, as if from the depths of his soul. "I have completed my mission. Now I have nothing left to lose." He closed the door, and the sharp sound of the slamming wood echoed in the silence, leaving Sarah standing alone. She felt the cold creep under her skin, chilling her to the bone. In that moment, she realized Elias was doomed. She understood that he was willingly walking towards death, sacrificing himself to save her, Sarah. He wasn't merely an old man, wise with years. He was a hero, ready to sacrifice himself for others. Sarah stepped forward and emerged from the hut. The wind continued to howl, wailing in the treetops as though 1,000 voices lamented his decision. But now, within its cries, she sensed hope. Faint but so precious. Hope for a new life. The bright hope that she could leave behind all she had endured guided her forward. She set foot on the road, beckoning into the unknown, into a misty distance. Elias remained in the hut, lost in thought. He sat down by the hearth, striking a spark and igniting the fire with a familiar movement. The flames danced, illuminating the familiar walls, and he gazed at them intently, feeling a solitary tear slowly but surely trace its path down his cheek. He knew that his earthly days were numbered, yet a strange calm reigned in his soul. He had atoned for his sins, paid in full. Then abruptly, a knock sounded in the silence. A gentle knock, but this time, the knock of fate itself. He knew who had come, sensing the inevitable. He raised the knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. His heart pounded wildly, but he was ready for whatever was to come. The door creaked open and the panels swung wide, revealing two sheriffs standing in the doorway. Their faces were grim, and they clutched weapons in their hands. One of them, a tall man with a weary gaze, stepped forward. "Elias?" he asked, his voice sounding hollow. Elias nodded, a lump in his throat preventing speech. "You are under arrest for murder," the sheriff announced, his words like a death sentence. Elias remained silent, his lips pressed tightly together. He knew the reckoning was inevitable. Elias was prepared to accept it. The sheriffs entered the shack, their faces appearing to be carved from stone. Handcuffs clicked, coldly encircling his wrists. One of them said, "Let's go, old man. The time has come to answer for what I have done." Elias emerged from the hut. The sun was already descending toward the horizon, painting the sky in crimson hues. He lifted his head, taking a deep breath of the fresh, cool air, filled with the scent of decaying leaves and the approaching night. In that moment, he felt an ethereal freedom. He was walking towards death, but fear did not reside within his soul. He walked free with his head held high towards his final sunset. He had atoned for his sins. Night descended upon the plain, enveloping everything in an impenetrable darkness. The wind had ceased, and only the whisper of the grass, barely audible, disturbed the silence. The hut stood alone, like a silent monument to a bygone era. Within, beneath the cold ashes of the hearth, lay the charred remains of his past. And on the horizon, far away, flickered only a dim star, like a tiny hope trembling in his heart. The sun beat down mercilessly, drying the meager vegetation, turning the land into a cracked desert. Dust, like a phantom, rose from under the hooves of the horse galloping across the sun-scorched earth. Sarah, wrapped in a worn shawl, gazed ahead, trying to find some sign, some semblance of civilization. Only a week had passed since she had left Elias's hut. For a week, agonizing thoughts had tormented her, haunted by bloody visions, images of death and the silent heroism of the old man. She tried to push these memories away, to drown them out, but they followed her relentlessly, like persistent shadows. Now, left alone with herself, in the silence, she had nothing left but to question herself, her purpose, and where she should go next. She was a fugitive, hiding from a past she preferred not to remember. She was pursued. They wanted her dead, yet she still didn't know who her enemy was. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. In her memory, the eyes of Elias surfaced, his calm resolve, his silent self-sacrifice. He wasn't an angel, no. He was just a man who'd made many mistakes, but had managed to find the strength within himself for redemption. He became her savior, giving her a chance at a new, brighter life. After several hours of travel, the outline of a small town appeared on the horizon. Sarah exhaled with relief, feeling the tension ease. She sincerely hoped to find not only a roof over her head here, but also food, and perhaps protection from those who hunted her. She needed to wait it out, recover from what she had been through, and gain some stability before deciding what to do next. The town was, frankly, run down, but surprisingly livable. A couple of saloons, a hardware store, several houses, a post office, and the sheriff's modest office comprised its entire list of attractions. Sarah tethered her horse near a saloon and, adjusting her hat, stepped inside. The air was thick and smoky, permeated with the scent of cheap tobacco and whiskey. Behind the gleaming bar stood an elderly bartender with a weary, world-worn expression, as if he had seen all the hardships this life had to offer. Sarah approached the counter and, without hesitation, ordered a glass of whiskey. She took it, her hands slightly trembling, and downed it in one gulp, hoping to calm the shivers that ran through her and ease the nervous tremor in her knees. "What brings you to these parts, miss?" the bartender asked, wiping a fogged glass. Sarah shrugged almost imperceptibly, as if the question was as familiar to her as the creak of the old saloon door. "Just passing through," she replied, her voice soft, almost indifferent. The bartender nodded, assessing her from head to toe. His gaze lingered on her beautiful but weary face, on her sun-faded dress. "It's pretty deserted here," he observed, his voice raspy from countless hours in the smoke-filled room. "Nothing to do." Sarah remained silent, staring off into space as if trying to perceive something invisible. She truly had nothing to say to him. What was her purpose here? She didn't even know herself. Suddenly, the saloon door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold wind and a man. He was tall, appearing to be around 35 years old. A tall, well-built man with an icy gaze. Sarah instantly recognized him as one of those who had ransacked Elias's cabin. The girl's heart began to pound wildly, like a bird trapped in a snare. She knew. He had found her. The man slowly surveyed the saloon, his gaze sweeping across the patrons until it landed on Sarah. A contemptuous smile played on his lips, cold, ruthless, and foreboding. "Well," he drawled, taking a step towards her, "it seems we meet again." Sarah jumped up from her chair, feeling the blood rush to her cheeks. She tried to break free, but the man gripped her arm in a death grip. "Where do you think you're going?" His gruff voice cut through the air. "You're not going anywhere." "Let me go!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with terror. The man simply chuckled, his laughter echoing through the nearly empty room. He was huge and strong, and she, small and defenseless, had nothing to fight back with. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, the bartender pulled an old, weathered rifle from under the counter. He aimed it at the man, squinting one eye. "Leave her alone," the stranger commanded, his voice full of authority. The man, who hadn't paid him any mind before, slowly turned around, his gaze filled with icy contempt sweeping over the old man. "You have no idea who you've tangled with, old-timer," he sneered, twisting his lips into a smirk. "Put away your weapon while you still can." "Don't you dare touch her." The bartender's voice, previously steady, wavered. He couldn't allow her to suffer the same fate. The stranger jerked his hand, and a shot echoed through the establishment. The bartender collapsed to the floor, his crimson blood spreading across the cracked boards, immediately soaking into them. Sarah screamed, her cry a mixture of terror, despair, and the awareness of impending doom. She froze in absolute horror, realizing this was likely the end. Her heart hammered, sensing impending disaster. The man advanced, his gaze seemingly burning a hole through her. "Now you're mine," he declared, the words a sentence. His hand, a metal trap, seized her wrist, dragging Sarah toward the exit. Each step echoed with sharp pain and panic. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the air. The man howled in agony and fell to the ground, his grip loosening. Gasping for breath, Sarah turned. In the doorway, illuminated by dim light, stood the sheriff. A revolver smoked in his hand, and determination blazed in his eyes. "You are under arrest for murder and assault," the sheriff announced sternly, his voice echoing in the evening air. The man, staggering, tried to rise to his feet, but the sheriff, without hesitation, fired another shot. The sound of the shot reverberated in the silence, and the man fell silent, lifelessly collapsing to the ground. The sheriff strode quickly towards Sarah, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked anxiously, leaning over her. Sarah, still feeling a tremor in her body, nodded in response, slowly raising her gaze. "Yes," she whispered softly, barely holding back tears. "Thank you." The sheriff gently helped her to her feet, his strong arms carefully supporting her. "Do you know who he is?" he asked again, his voice low and tense. Sarah nodded, unable to utter a word. Fear still gnawed at her, a chilling reminder of the recent struggle, of the icy horror that had gripped her soul. "He is one of those who tried to kill me," she whispered, her voice trembling. The sheriff frowned, lines deepening between his eyebrows. He remained silent for a long while, as if gathering his thoughts. "I know," he finally stated, his gaze serious and focused. "I am investigating this case." Sarah flinched in surprise. Her eyes widened and her lips parted in astonishment. "You knew?" she whispered. The sheriff nodded, his face a mask of weariness and resolve. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice sounding hollow. "We've been watching them for quite a while. Their crimes are multiplying. Robberies, murders, illegal trade. He paused, as if gathering his strength, and then said, "They killed Elias." Sarah froze, as if struck by lightning. A sudden wave of grief, unknown to her before, washed over her. It was impossible to hold back the tears. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving wet trails. "He was a wonderful man," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He saved my life." The sheriff nodded slowly, his eyes seeming to hold reflections of the past. "I know," he said softly, his voice sounding hollow. He truly was a hero. The sheriff turned his gaze to Sarah, studying her face, attempting to detect any lingering traces of fear, but it seemed to be gone. "You are free," he said a little louder, trying to make his voice gentle. "You have nothing more to fear." Sarah nodded, feeling a long-awaited freedom spreading within her. The clinging grip of fear that had once bound her movements was gone. She was truly free, free from the nightmare, from the torment, from the horror. The sheriff walked her to her horse, his gaze a mixture of understanding and sympathy. "What do you plan to do now?" he asked, studying her face. Sarah simply shrugged, her eyes distant. "I have no idea," she replied, her voice quiet and weary. "I suppose I'll leave here, try to start fresh, a new life." The sheriff nodded, his face etched with comprehension. "I believe this is the best course of action," he murmured, his voice gentle. He extended his hand, compassion mirrored in his eyes. "I wish you well," he said, clasping her hand in his. Sarah returned the gesture, a flicker of unease dancing within her. "Thank you," she whispered, striving to conceal the tremor in her voice. Gathering the reins, she effortlessly mounted the saddle. Turning for one final look, Sarah glanced back at the small town she had just departed. Then, guiding her horse eastward, she set off on her journey. Ahead lay the utter unknown, but fear had receded. Instead, a feeling of freedom swelled within her chest. She rode toward the rising sun, its rays caressing her face, washing away the remnants of doubt and past torment. A long, challenging journey lay ahead, but now she was ready for anything. She felt alive, truly free. Several years had passed since then. Sarah, who had left her small town forever, had become a tireless traveler. She changed jobs countless times, wandering from place to place, sometimes working in a noisy saloon, pouring whiskey and taking orders, sometimes on a dusty ranch, taming wild mustangs, sometimes extending a helping hand to those in need, healing wounds and easing suffering. She tried with all her might to erase the past from her memory, as if it were a nightmare. Betrayal, pain, blood, death, all these heavy memories haunted her, but she tirelessly tried to live only for the present day. One day, when the sun was mercilessly scorching the burnt desert and the sand was crunching under the hooves of her horse, she stumbled upon a solitary, abandoned cabin. At that moment, her heart began to pound wildly. She recognized the place. It was Elias's hut, a man whose name still echoed in her memory. Sarah reined in her horse, dismounted, and her feet met the scorching earth. She slowly approached the dilapidated door, raised her hand, and knocked. Silence. No one answered her knock. She pushed the door, and it silently yielded inward. Sarah stepped into the opening. Silence reigned inside the hut. Everything looked exactly as she remembered it. The familiar walls, the old furniture, the dimness pierced by the rays of the setting sun. Sarah sat down by the hearth, took a handful of dry twigs, and struck a match. The flames leaped up instantly, illuminating her face. She stared into the fire, feeling a lone tear trace a path down her cheek. The image of Elias flashed in her memory. His quiet determination, not a hint of doubt in his gaze, his silent sacrifice. She would never be able to forget him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. She recoiled in surprise. Slowly, as if afraid to disturb the silence, she approached the door and cautiously opened it. A woman stood in the doorway. Young, incredibly beautiful, but her eyes were filled with such wild fear that her heart clenched. She wore a filthy dress, and her bluish-black hair was tousled as if she had just escaped a nightmare. She looked utterly lost and terrified. Sarah felt a chill crawl down her spine, a painful echo of her own fears. Images from the past flooded her memory. She recalled herself in her most desperate hours. She remembered Elias. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Help me," the woman gasped, breathless from running. "They're after me." Sarah hastily ushered her inside the cabin, her own heart pounding wildly in her chest. She, more than anyone, understood the gravity of the situation, knew exactly what this frightened woman was feeling. Sarah scrutinized her face, searching for anything besides fear. In the fugitive's eyes, she saw a desperate resolve, and Sarah knew she had to help. She couldn't do otherwise. Sarah met the young woman's gaze, and in those eyes saw the depth of the terror she'd endured. And in those eyes, she saw a reflection of her own past, a frozen image of fear and a hesitant hope. Suddenly, she realized, by helping this woman, she was helping herself. She could atone for her sins, just as Elias had once done. A bitter, weary smile touched her lips. She knew a long, dangerous journey awaited her, but she was ready for it now. Free Elias, she inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the sharp scent of smoke and dust. She breathed in the atmosphere of the eternal Wild West, where good and evil intertwined like barbed wire, creating only the illusion of peace. Elias, the old hunter, had found his rest, and Sarah, his apprentice, now had to take up the mantle. The circle was complete. The sunset still painted the sky with blood-red hues, as if foretelling something ominous. The sun slowly sank below the horizon, leaving behind only a crimson glow that gradually faded. Life, it seemed, paid no attention to these changes. It continued its race, carrying away days, weeks, and months, filled with their own worries, joys, and sorrows. And even at this hour, when the sky blazed with the last glimmers of the day, the world didn't stop, continuing its relentless course.